Hello and welcome to the fifth in our P2 webinars series. Today we're going to be looking at P2 Adaptive Delivery. P2 Adaptive Delivery is our in-house transformation methodology that we take very seriously here at P2. All of our consultants do training in it and look to apply it when they're on client site. And it's really a methodology that allows us to bridge the challenges of the agile waterfall debate and get to value very quickly and effectively. As with previous weeks, we'll be talking for about half an hour on this. We will be sharing with you the recording afterwards, so do feel free to share that with anyone you would like to. We, as usual, don't have time for questions because it's quite a tight timescale, but we will, of course, answer any questions you do have in the next 24 hours. So before we get into the main detail of the session, allow me to introduce you to P2 for those who've not come across us before. We're the transformation consultancy set up about 7 years ago to offer a real alternative to the big four in the transformation space. And as you can see, we had a lot of fun over the last 7 years doing all sorts of fun stuff. When people ask us what we do, what we really stand for, really we stand for these three promises to our clients. P2 Consulting improves, controls and delivers on your transformation ambitions, and we do that through the 12 services that sit below there. Now, usually when we're doing one of these webinars, we're diving into one of these services in a bit more detail. Today we're doing something slightly different because adaptive delivery, as you'll discover, really underpins all of these services, all of the approaches we take to deliver these services to our clients. So there's me, a photo clearly taken during this current coronavirus outbreak. I'm Director of Consulting here at P2 Consulting, and I'm also Chief Methodologist around Adaptive Delivery. So please do feel free to link into me or drop me any notes if you've got any questions or queries on this. So with that out of the way, why don't we crack into adaptive delivery? Probably the first question to answer is, well, why? I mean, and I'm sure everyone on this call knows there's a myriad of different methodologies and approaches one can follow out there, Prince2, MSP, Scaled Agile, SIPOC, whatever you particularly want to name. So why on earth have we come up with a new methodology? Well, we've been seeing a number of interesting trends in the industry out there. We've definitely seen a move away from classic, old-scale, big transformations. We can all list challenges around there or examples of transformations that have gone wrong. The C-suite rarely approaches these transformations with excitement anymore. They're always slightly threatened by them. They're extremely expensive, and when they go wrong, they can really go wrong. And that, as we all know, Agile is all the rage, but Agile is challenging. I'm a massive fan of Agile, as people who've listened to these webinars before will know. But it's not easy. It's not an obvious alternative to Prince2 or to MSP, and particularly scaling it is challenging. So we asked ourselves the problem, how on earth do you find something that strikes a balance between those two worlds? How do you find something that can give you both the stability and scale of traditional methods of delivery, whilst allowing an organization to move at the pace and actually with the cultural benefits that something like Agile delivers? And we came up with adaptive delivery. And if there's two things I really want you to sort of take away from the session, the two goals that we try and get to with adaptive delivery, it's about trying to get to those benefits early and often. And you're going to hear me use the word benefit and value an awful lot over the next half hour, and I don't apologize for that. You know, it's why we're all in doing what we do. So getting to those benefits early and often, but also trying to do it in a way that provides an element of predictability and rigor that you need to really land those big bets, and let's be honest, retain the confidence of the C-suite, who continually just want to know what they're getting, when they're getting, and how they're going to get it. So that's what we're trying to do really with adaptive delivery. And I always finish this slide with this particular statement. You know, it's more than the framework, it's more like an attitude. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, we've talked a lot about various different methodologies over the last 5 or 6 weeks of these webinars, and I talk a lot about the different types of methodologies, whether they're process driven, whether they're methodologically driven, i.e. sort of very detailed around the steps you're going to take, or whether they're principled driven. Now, principle driven, as you know, tends to mean that there are some overarching guiding principles that one follows when one applies a methodology. And that's very much where AD sits. It's principle based, it's attitude based, it's cultural based, and we do that for a very simple reason. We as consultants tend to land into a lot of different organizations. They have a range of different methodologies. We inevitably have to work with the methodology that exists in that space, and one can do that as long as one's applying a principle based approach to those methodologies. So what we do with adaptive delivery is we try and tie down a whole range of important principles that help us deliver early and often with rigor and predictability, but that can then sit over the in-house methodology and approach. So that's why we developed PT Adaptive Delivery. As I say, very principle-based in its focus. So what are those principles? Well, when we talk about what those principles are, we like to use a bit of an analogy. And that analogy looks at Fleur, and Fleur's setting up a seafood restaurant. Now, if you went back to a classic kind of waterfall-y Prince 2 type approach to building a seafood restaurant, you'd build the plans, you'd look at the entire structure, you'd understand the entire cost, and in this case it's about £1 million. You know, it's going to take a year to complete that build, it's going to take you 3 years to pay that back. Now that's an awfully long time, that's an awfully big bet. With adaptive delivery, we ask ourselves, is there a smarter way to do it? And we believe there is. So if we're looking at adaptive delivery, what are those smarter ways? Well, firstly and most importantly, we try and ask ourselves, where does the value sit? And in this example, the value sits in the kitchen. The kitchen is where the food is taken and turned into a product that can be sold. So the money sits in the kitchen. If we look at the kitchen, you can kit the kitchen out in a month. So we just get on and do that. But we have a problem. How do we turn that valuable product into cash, into end goal? Well, the restaurant's not going to be finished for another 11 months, but we can build a hole in the wall. We could get a stand to go and sell that product out there. So although you are putting cost up front, the value of that quick win massively outweighs the value, the extra cost of building that hole in the wall. So the first and most fundamental principle of what we're doing around adaptive delivery is finding that value proof point, that point where we can be getting value from our activity early and often. So providing a value proof point. So that gives us our ability to get to value very, very quickly. However, there's something else very important we're trying to do. And with this, we are learning. And we all know that transformation is basically a journey into the unknown. It's all about learning, really. So for us, the absolute second principle of any adaptive delivery approach is about trying to make sure we are doing stuff that helps us learn about the environment. Now, in this example, Fleur, by selling to the customer, is engaging nice and early with those customers and learning what they like, what they'll buy, and how the kitchen should be working to provide them with their with that end product. It's all incredibly valuable information, and it all allows her to shape what she does next. So, second principle, absolutely critical. Understand what the unknowns are, hunt those down, building learning milestones to help you do that. So Fleur's got her value. She understands how she's going to get to value early enough. She understands what she needs to learn through the journey she's going through. So we should be mapping that out. And there's no getting away from that. You need a plan. We call that a roadmap in this situation. And that roadmap is really a journey through the key value proof points and the learning milestones that Fleur's going to go through over the next year or so. She knows what needs to happen. She needs to make that happen. If she knows what needs to happen, she needs to rigorously control that journey. And here we're back to some really good, solid disciplines of project management, which is building and doing the stuff that needs to happen with cost in mind, efficiently and effectively. Then there's nothing here that's going to blow you out of the water. It's just good, solid discipline. It's controlling your cost and your time. It's making sure you're using modern techniques to be efficient and effective. And it's ensuring that what's being delivered is what it's expected to be delivered, and using your learning milestones to understand about the journey you're on. So rigorously controlling the journey, absolutely critical. But whilst you're controlling that journey, you must never lose sight of the fact that you really need to be thinking very, very clearly about the future and trying to understand what's coming towards you, analysing and reacting that accordingly. In this example, we use the example of actually, is there upcoming festivals occurring? Are people starting to complain out on the street? You need to be hunting down those risks, those unknowns you don't currently know, to help improve your chance of delivering into the future. And as long as you are looking into the future, you should also be working carefully with your stakeholders. And far too often, stakeholders are seen as something of a burden. Fleur, to be really effective, needs to be working with those stakeholders and making sure they are helping her and answering decisions and helping her with information around stuff that they know. Again, in this example, there's that classic example of there'll be food suppliers, they'll know about movements in the market. There'll be people providing the money, they'll understand better ways to do that. So the really important final point is to work with your stakeholders, to engage with your partners, to help use their knowledge to improve your chance of delivery. So, 6 fundamental principles that underpin Fleur's approach to delivering her restaurant in adaptive delivery fashion. Identifying value proof points, understanding major risks through your learning milestones, building that into a roadmap so that we're delivering benefits early and often, rigorously controlling the journey along that roadmap, making sure you've always got one eye on the future and you're analysing that, flexibly engaging with your stakeholders to get value out of them. So if you hang on to those 6 principles, that builds the adaptive delivery framework. Now there's really 3 major chunks of this framework that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to do a deep dive into the left-hand side, the value-focused design, because actually that's something that we end up doing an awful lot of. We'll have a look at managing the journey along the roadmap delivery, and then we'll do a final deep dive into what we call bamboo governance, which is a technique we employ to try and make sure that your governance is really heavily focused around decision making. So let's have a look at that first bit of activity, value focused design, which corresponds to getting those value proof points and identifying those learning milestones. So what are you doing first of all with value focused design? Well, really we're doing what we call business case value decoupling, which is a really fancy way of saying, I'm going to explore the business case that exists for this project, this program, and really try and understand what value means in that business case. Once I've understood what value means, I'm going to have a really good look at the design and understand which bits of that design can be decoupled and deliver specific bits of value. So how can I decouple the design? How can I understand whether real value lives in that design? And how can I ensure that we are delivering that quickly, early, so that we can get value back to the customer and learn about the journey we're going on? Now, that sounds quite complicated, quite fancy. Actually, it's usually something that can be done in an all-day workshop. If I give a classic example of where we've done this in the past as a company, we worked on a major merger of 2 quite large retail organizations a few years back. Now, if you're looking at a merger like that, that's a huge number of moving parts, but ultimately value comes from reducing the cost base and ensuring that your products are more aligned to a changing marketplace. Now, if you're looking at places where cost exists or ways to reduce that cost, a classic way is through the suppliers. And actually, if you start to look at those 2 organizations, you'll very quickly see that they'll have very, very similar supplier base. By applying a methodology like adaptive delivery, you basically deconstruct that business case. So you look at where value sits, and obviously there's a huge amount of value in looking at your supplier base. You pull that to the left, so right to the beginning of your activity, and you go and speak very quickly to the suppliers. You talk about actually how you're going to merge, how actually there's going to be a much bigger slice of the pie for everyone, and so they should be giving you a discount. Now, in this particular case, we essentially did that within the first month and managed to pay for the entire program delivery within that month. Now, not all cases are quite as value adding as that, but the concept stands. You're essentially trying to look at the business case, you're trying to understand what value means in that business case, and you're ensuring that the bits of the transformation that give the most value are modularized, i.e. can be pulled out of the rest of it and pushed to the left. And as I say, P2 Adaptive Delivery, we will prioritize quick wins over big bang. every time. So ideally, you're getting to value through a workshop. This is the sort of classic workshop we'd run. Actually, you're trying to identify what value means to the business. You're modularizing that end state, i.e. breaking it down so that you can build individual bits of it in place, and you're really understanding which are the value proof points you want to drive towards. It really is as simple as something like this. You can spend sort of half a day really trying to scratch down what you think those values are, build that out, and then prioritizing that to give you the value proof points you're trying to deliver. So that's half of the value focused design challenge. I've got my value proof points. Now the second half is really around what we call the learning milestones, and you're trying to do here something that, it's not rocket science, but it's amazing how often it gets ignored when you're doing transformation, and that's accepting that we are basically operating in a world of unknown when we start to do large scale change. That world of unknown is going to have both a whole range of known unknowns and unknown unknowns. There'll essentially be a load of stuff we know we don't know, and a load of stuff that's going to hit us later on. What tends to happen when one is delivering a large-scale program is one assumes that something like example one's going to happen, that walk in, we know the journey we're going to go on, we're going to chunk down that journey, we're going to deliver something, and value is going to drop out and everyone's going to celebrate. The reality is usually something closer to 2, in that you expect to start down a particular route and then you get hit by known knowns and unknown knowns, and you bounce all over the shop. Things take a lot longer and it's all a bit of a challenge. What we say in adaptive delivery is that stuff is going to happen. There is stuff we do not know and there are assumptions we are making. We face into that, we prioritize those, and we pull those assumptions as far to the left as we can. We build learning milestones so we can challenge those assumptions and actually work out what the right direction to go in is. By doing that, by answering those assumptions, we reduce the level of risk. So when the unknown stuff hits us, we have bandwidth to deal with that. So learning milestones is our way of basically establishing the things we are going to test to allow us to reduce the risk and to resolve those assumptions. So bringing those two things together essentially gives us our value focused design and ultimately our roadmap, the roadmap made up of the value proof points and the learning milestones that will tell us more about the journey we are going on. So once you've got that roadmap, you are essentially looking to deliver beneath it. Now, we talk a lot about adaptive delivery being what we call methodologically agnostic. The reason we say that is because as long as you're keeping an eye on sort of learning milestones and proof points, you're essentially trying to deliver stuff. The methodology used to deliver stuff is essentially not important. So for instance, if we're delivering in an agile fashion, we'd expect lots of small drops of value and learning. If we're doing it in a waterfall approach, which is the bottom example, it'll take slightly longer, but we should still be able to get to a point whereby we are dropping out value in line with the value proof points and in line with the learning milestones that we need to deliver. So we're very committed to the fact that we believe that adaptive delivery is methodologically agnostic. As I say, that's utterly critical because so many of the different organizations we work into have methodologies that they're already establishing. So we've talked about two things. We've talked about that early stage, the value-focused design stage, and we've talked about actually the delivery of the roadmap and trying to ensure that is methodologically agnostic. I'd like to touch on one final bit, which is really what we call bamboo governance. Now, bamboo governance is called bamboo governance for the very simple reason that it's a governance structure that is both flexible but firm like bamboo. Because what inevitably goes wrong in pretty much any methodology you've got is that delivering change almost always has to change. Stuff will go wrong both externally and internally. Things have to move around and we have to challenge assumptions. The challenge you have, I always find with governance, is you have a chunk of people sitting in a room and you've made certain promises to them about the journey you're going down, and inevitably you have to come back and change those promises. That undermines trust. People don't like that. It causes decision-making angst. The important thing about adaptive delivery, and particularly bamboo governance, is you're setting up a governance structure that expects change, that is ready for change, and that is ready to make decisions about moving the target and moving the journey one is going on. You do that by basically being very honest and open about the fact that you've got change coming towards you, and about trying to be very clear about who is best to make particular decisions. So let me explain that in a little bit more detail. What we try and do with Bamboo governance is be really honest about, as I say, two things. Firstly, we try and have a very honest discussion when we're doing the value focused design about the journey we're going on. We've built proof points with the major stakeholders, and more importantly, we've built learning milestones. So we've built that structure of risk and assumptions with the key stakeholders. They are the ones who've come up and told us that this is the stuff they don't know and needs to be explored. They are the ones who've agreed what the learning milestones are. So actually, what are the things we are going to do to test those assumptions? And as such, they are the ones who are waiting and ready, therefore, for when we do those learning milestones to sit in a room and make a decision around those milestones based on the new data we are bringing in. So being incredibly honest about the fact that a change is going to occur through the journey we're going on, and allowing those key stakeholders to say what that change means and what data they need to make those right decisions. So that's the first and really important thing to do. The other really important thing to do, I believe, is to make sure the right decisions are taken by the right people at the right time. That sounds really obvious, but let me give you My apologies. I think some people were saying they were struggling to hear me. Hopefully that's coming through a bit clearer now. So if we look at 3T reporting, essentially we've talked about tracking, so actually measuring what's happened in the past, and that basically defines historical truth. This is what has happened. If we look at target stage, that's basically saying where do we need to get to, and that's an agreement you make with the business. How many points do we need to achieve? What do we need to deliver value to the client? And question 3 is the trend. So actually, what is happening at the moment? If we continue in the way we're doing, what are we likely to achieve? Now, if you're going to boil down your metrics to these 3 points, and that actually supports you in pretty much any decision making to do, because a decision that is focused around the target, i.e., is the target right? Does it need to move up? Does it need to be down? Is essentially a business discussion. You're actually going to the business and saying, we need to do something different to what we thought we originally needed to do. Are you happy for us to make this? A decision that is about moving trend back to target is an internal program decision, i.e., we are not going to hit the target, we need more resource, or we need to do something different in terms of methodology and so on and so forth. Now, if you can think about all your metrics in those terms, that then allows you to structure your decision making around that. So if I jump back to the previous slide, you'll see that anything that involves bringing your trend back onto target is then that internal decision, and that occurs within the delivery methodology you've got in place. You know, in your weekly steer code, in your monthly steer codes, or your weekly project board get-togethers. However, anything around the target tends to occur with the business stakeholders, with your business engagement meetings. Now, I'm very committed to the fact that those shouldn't be on a formal cadence. And if we go back to our thinking around the roadmap is about proof points and learning milestones, which have all been agreed with the business. Now, the cadence for that level of governance should actually just tie in with that. Actually, every couple of months, you've got a proof point discussion, you've got a learning milestone, business walks into the room, they're expecting a discussion around data, you're presenting that data to them. The learning milestones then will inevitably adapt to the target. So I have learned something about my transformation, I've learned what the customer prefers because we've done something, or I've learned what methodology works best. Can we move the target to align with that new learning? So in terms of Bamboo governance, we're really clear about the decisions that need to be taken at which level. We're really clear about the data we're bringing in. We're really clear about the kind of reporting structure, and we're really clear about the cadence that works for the different entities. So we've talked about value-focused design and actually ensuring that your roadmap is structured around proof points where value is delivered early and often, and learning milestones which tell you something about the journey you're going. We've talked a bit about the delivery of the roadmap, how that works, and actually how it's methodologically agnostic. And we've talked about Bamboo governance, a really important aspect of trying to make sure decision making is done by the right people at the right time, at the right level. People often also then ask me, what does it feel like to work on an adaptive delivery program? So in my opinion, it should feel something like this. So in this model, the red line shows the level of risk. The blue line shows the level of benefit. And in the classic adaptive delivery world, we're expecting risk to begin at a high level. We go into this thing knowing there's a lot of unknowns, because that's the nature of what we're doing. But as we progress through that journey, that level of unknown drops as we understand more and we go through more and more learning milestones. That's very different to normal large-scale transformation, where you actually tend to go into it assuming you know more than you actually do, and you see the risk ramp up as you go through. And benefits, absolutely critically, should be building up steadily over time in small iterations, with it peaking towards the end as you learn more and you're able to deliver more. So ideally, on an adaptive delivery transformation, we'd see a model like this. If you've joined us on previous webinars, you know we're talking an awful lot about the current crisis situation and how your projects and your programs should be responding to that, and particularly at the portfolio level. I like to use AD as a real powerful tool in this space. So one of the areas that AD is particularly powerful on is actually looking at the value that you're trying to deliver to and ensuring your projects and programs are designed to do that quickly and often. Now, AD has real strength in this space, and actually one of the things you'll obviously be doing at the moment is, number one, redesigning your strategy, because actually the world has changed so fundamentally. Number two, looking to reshape and accelerate some projects. And of course, number three, trying to deal with all the massive uncertainty that exists out there. Adaptive delivery has two really helpful tools for that, and they're all in that value-focused design stage, and that's both the looking at the value, building those value proof points around the new structure of value, so you can deliver new value quickly and often, and of course the learning milestones, which helps you face into the uncertainty we are progressing towards. So actually, if you're asking me where you might want to apply something like adaptive delivery, obviously you can apply the entire methodology, but it's also very powerful in point solutions. We often talk about three really powerful places you can use it. There's obviously that finding the value, and this is something we do a lot of. It's essentially a workshop. You can sit down with the organization, you can sit down with a project or program, the program that's potentially got too big or is starting to struggle to really understand what it needs to be doing first. And you use that value workshop to break down what value means for that organization, to find value in the business case, to prioritize the modularized architectural build that will give that value, to work out what the central order of that priority is.
The second thing we often use it for is actually relaunching projects. So often you'll find projects and programs just are struggling to get going because of all the assumptions that they're trying to work through. Again, another classic one we do a lot of. There's too much assumptions out there. What we like to do is use the learning milestone workshop. So really narrow down those assumptions and work out what we need to do to challenge those assumptions and build that into the early stages of any project or program. Again, that's a really good way of getting confidence back and starting to kick off that project. And the third place we like to use AD is really around the band of governance. And that's where organizations are really struggling to make decisions. So if you can look at the governance and try and restructure it so you're making the right decisions at the right time using something like band of governance, again, you can really start to give that governance team. So we're pretty much out of time now. I hope you've enjoyed that very quick canter through adaptive delivery and the main principles that underpin that. As mentioned, we'll be sharing this webinar after the sessions. We'll be sending the questionnaire. I will send the recording out to everyone who's attended. Do feel free to share that. I'll be looking to get back and answer questions within the next 24 hours. We've got a couple of really good workshops coming up in the future. In 2 weeks' time on the 21st, we've got Project Reboot, which is going to be a very popular one, I think, and that's looking at how one should be looking to revitalize a portfolio as we begin to come out of this crisis. And that's the flip side to the Project Mothball webinar we did a couple of weeks back. And then a few weeks after that, we'll be looking at financial crime, another area we do a lot of work with. We provide a lot of thought to our clients in. So we'll be looking at our model for reviewing regulatory approach and then building that into programs of transformation. Thank you once again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful bank holiday weekend.